Hey there. Today I want to talk about the libertarianism to fascism pipeline. On paper, libertarianism and fascism should be quite different, where the former values completely free enterprise and the latter complete control over a nation, authoritarianism, in order to enforce certain ethnic and social values. However, the difference between the two ideologies is not as wide as it seems, especially not in practice, but I'd argue not on paper either. Libertarianism and fascism are both right wing ideologies, after all, built from a foundation of the same right wing axioms. Specifically, the axiom that hierarchy is natural and desirable. Libertarianism suggests, for example, that full economic freedom through a deregulated free market is desirable despite producing immense wealth gaps and thus an economic hierarchy. And they justify this by saying that the wealthy deserve to be wealthy because they are the smartest, the most talented, and work the hardest for it. And the poor deserve to be poor because they are lazy and lack the vision and talent to create wealth. In fact, the hierarchy is not just an accident libertarians tolerate, but a desired outcome meant to reward the people they deem superior and punish those they deem inferior, based on perceived economic value. Fascism, in similar fashion, seeks to create a hierarchy of human beings, not based on economics like libertarianism, but based on ethnic essentialism. The idea that certain ethnicities or races of human beings are inherently superior to others. Traditionally, such a fascist hierarchy puts white people, sometimes very specific white people, on top of the hierarchy and non white people at the bottom, defining non white often based directly on skin color, but sometimes on other superficial qualities. Jewish people, for example, are often the target of fascism, despite sometimes passing as white. That's not how the hierarchy has to look, of course. You can also see similar tendencies in, say, Japan or China, both of which have strong ethnocentric national identities that are highly conducive to fascist hierarchies and racism. The similarity between libertarianism and fascism here is that both are built on the idea that hierarchy is good, but beyond that, they both have an axiomatic, non falsifiable belief in the supremacy of the group of people they place at the top of the hierarchy. What I mean by this is that the libertarian and the fascist both attribute an inherent superiority to the group at the top of their hierarchy. And even if the examples they give of this supremacy are directly disproven, they will still hold on to the belief in the supremacy of the group purely intuitively, based only on their feelings. For example, in a capitalist system, it is not always the smartest or the hardest working people who rise to the top, because there are several factors that contribute to a person or group's overall success. Sure, hard work and talent are good qualities that can help, but there are other qualities that often weigh more heavily in determining success. The single factor that weighs the most in this sense is inherited wealth as well as inherited social, economic, cultural, and political power. In other words, if you're born into success, you'd have to work pretty damn hard not to succeed because you already have succeeded just by the circumstances of your birth. Social power, political power, economic power, cultural power, and perhaps especially capital are massive factors that determine the overall success of a group or individual in a capitalist system. If you are born into wealth, you have the capital to go to a good school, buy a nice house, start your own company, etc. If you're born into a family with social and political power, you are born with the connections needed to move your career forward. Meanwhile, if you're poor, even if you're born smart and talented, you might not go very far without the capital to get an education, get a place to live, or actualize your ideas. You might not go very far without the business connections or political connections to have the right people to help you with the right things and get your ideas off the ground. Your starting point in a capitalist system makes a huge difference, and if you look at people on top of the hierarchy, the wealthiest people, they're not always the smartest at all. Quite often, they're actually very dumb after having been surrounded by yes people their entire lives. And in the case of someone like Elon Musk, say, just take credit for the work of other people, people lower in the hierarchy. Now take fascism. Fascists might cite studies showing that black people have on average a lower IQ than white people, and that's why white people are superior in their mind. I'm of the belief that all human beings are equal regardless of any kind of notion of intelligence or talent, simply because I axiomatically believe that all human beings have the same inherent value. I don't value a smart person more than I value a dumb person. However, research into IQ disparities is often quite flawed, doesn't always account for sociological or socioeconomic factors, and has, in fact, over time provided results showing the supposedly inherent IQ gap between white people and people of color closing fast, correlating strongly to people of color being provided the same educational and economic opportunities as white people. If you point this out to a fascist who is espousing eugenic ideas of the racial superiority of white people in IQ tests, they won't care about that at all. They won't care that they're wrong. They will still just say that white people are superior because their belief in the supremacy of white people is like the libertarians' belief in the supremacy of wealthy people, not based on facts but feelings. It is their intuitive feeling that white people are superior. It is their ideological belief that white people are superior. And this feeling of theirs is non falsifiable because there is no proof that can disprove it to them, because it is just their axiomatic belief, their intuitive feelings. How do you disprove someone's feelings? Okay, so where am I going with this then? Well, if you look at a free market system, what group of people is more likely to end up at the bottom currently? Because of a number of factors, including systemic racism, it is people of color who tend to be overrepresented there. If the libertarian believes that a free market system produces fair results, where people end up where they belong based on hard work and talent, and people of color are at the bottom of the hierarchy, it would not be too big a leap for a libertarian to deduce that people of color must be inferior to white people, or they wouldn't be at the bottom of the hierarchy in a libertarian belief system. And if you value productivity over human beings, if you think a hierarchy based on success is desirable, if you believe failure and success are entirely based on the individual's hard work and talent, and if you see people of color at the bottom of the hierarchy, then surely it would make sense to conclude that white people are as a group superior to people of color. Libertarianism is, as such, conducive to racism, which is conducive to fascism, which is just ideological racism after all. As I pointed out in my video, is conservatism fascist? As such, despite libertarianism and fascism being on paper quite different, they're actually a lot more similar than it would at first appear, because they're built on the same axioms, and the former is conducive to the latter. I see a clear pipeline from libertarianism to fascism. Furthermore, I do think a lot of fascists claim to be libertarians because it is optically less egregious. It usually doesn't take a lot of digging to uncover a self-identified libertarian's racism, now does it? Thanks for listening. Please leave a like and a comment and subscribe as it would help my channel immensely. If you enjoy my content, consider supporting me on Patreon with a small dollar donation. I will never paywall any content, but any support is greatly appreciated. See you next time.